All right, welcome to our Zoom room audience tonight and now to our Facebook audience as well. I'm Jonathan Haupt, the Executive Director of our nonprofit Pat Conroy Literary Center here in Beaufort, coming to you tonight from the Dorothea Benton Frank Education Room. I can see Dottie and her family right over my shoulder and screen right there. This is a really special event we have tonight, a conversation between publishing powerhouses Zibby Owens, author of Bookends, a memoir of love, loss, and literature right there. And also our returning champion, Lauren Marino, rejoining us for a second year in a row, author of Bookish Broads, Women Who Wrote Themselves into History. Tonight's event is also the beginning of our 6th annual Lowcountry Book Club Convention, which continues with events tomorrow in person in Bluffton in partnership with the brand new Culinary Institute of the South, our friends at Nevermore Books, and with the generous support of the Pulpwood Queens Book Club, the largest book club in the US. The Lowcountry Book Club Convention is one of our signature events here at the Conroy Center, and it really began as an opportunity to bring together the various book clubs of our Lowcountry here in Beaufort County to give them a chance to get to talk to each other and share ideas about how to curate their book clubs, as well as deepen our lives as individual readers and members of reading communities. And then we had a pandemic. You may have read about it. I think it was covered in a couple of the papers. And that catapulted us into the world of virtual programming and gave us access to audiences we never would have had otherwise, not just around the country, but to some degree around the world. And we continue to honor and reach out to those communities of readers and writers through virtual programs like tonight. So I'm so grateful to everyone for joining us through Zoom and through Facebook. Those of you who've participated in our Lowcountry Book Club Convention before will remember that I have an unapologetic love affair with books about books. I have shelves and shelves of them in my home library, certainly including Pat Conroy's very own book about books, My Reading Life, a fantastic collection of Pat's introductions to the books and the writers that shaped the course of his life too. So I'm always on the lookout for new books about books, and that's what brought Zibby into my life by virtue of Bookends, which I was very honored to review for the Pulitzer Prize winning Charleston Post and Courier. And in that review, I said this, it's fun to quote yourself in these introductions. Throughout the remembrances shared in the pages of Bookends, Owens writes in a conversational, companionable tone, befitting a self-described book messenger who has made the championing of writers and stories her mission. The result is a briskly paced, heartwarming, and often inspiring journey of discovering comfort, purpose, friendships, and one's own voice in a lifetime of immersion into transformative reading. For those of you unfamiliar with Zibby, and there may just be one or two people at this point in the universe who are not familiar with Zibby, she does all of the things. She is an author, podcaster, publisher, CEO, mother of 4. She is the founder of Zibby Owens Media, which is inclusive of Zibby Books, a publishing house for fiction and memoir, Zcast, a podcast network featuring Zibby's award-winning podcast, Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books, and also Moms Don't Have Time To, a new content and community site, including Zibby's virtual book club. She's a regular columnist for the Good Morning America program and also a whole bunch of other morning news shows as a recommender of books. She's the editor of 2 anthologies, Moms Don't Have Time to Have Kids and Moms Don't Have Time To, a quarantine anthology, and also the author of the children's book, Princess Charming. She regularly pens personal essays, starting with her very first one for 17 magazine in 1992. Zibby lives in New York with her husband, Kyle Owens of Morning Moon Productions, and her 4 children. And it's an absolute honor to welcome you virtually to the Conroy Center tonight, Zibby. Interviewing Zibby this evening is our dear friend, Lauren Marino, the author of Bookish Broads, which was also coincidentally reviewed in the Charleston Post and Courier, but not by me, by my then 17-year-old protege, Holland Perryman, the founder of DALO, Diversity Awareness Youth Literacy Organization. And in her review, Holland wrote, Marino's Chronicle of Women Wordsmiths invites readers to better appreciate the influence of past writers on their modern counterparts and to embrace an even more inclusive global view of the female experience. Bookish Broads illuminates the transformative legacy of women writers and invites us to join a story still unfolding. Last year, Holland and I got to interview Lauren on stage at our Lowcountry Book Club Convention. Lauren is the editorial director of Hachette Books. Prior to that, she was VP and editorial director at Gotham Books, where she was the founding editor in 2001, publishing multiple nonfiction bestsellers. She has also worked at Broadway Books, a division of Random House, and Hyperion, where she was responsible for the Miramax imprint. In addition to Bookish Broads, Lauren is also the author of What Would Dolly Do? How to Be a Diamond in a Rhinestone World. I am delighted to welcome both Zibby and Lauren to our virtual Zoom room tonight, and I'm so excited to get to listen in on your conversation. Welcome to you both.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's so nice of you to invite me here, and also for the fabulous review. That was such a highlight of the whole press. So thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate all your support too. And I'm really happy to be able to finally meet Zibby Owens in person and to talk to her. I've been following her career as a book influencer, as a podcaster. I've been listening to her podcasts. She's now starting her own publishing company. She has a magazine. She has a podcast company. And she has 4 kids. And as a mom myself, I don't really know how she does it. And that's a whole nother conversation, I think, for another day. But I was thrilled to read Bookends. It's a memoir about friendship, about loss, about finding love after divorce. It's about motherhood. It's really about having a sense of community and resilience. But it's also about finding your voice, finding your purpose, and as you say, finding that thing that you want to do, that you want to live by and die by. And like you, I mean, when I read this, I just felt that I was reading a book by a kindred spirit, because you always knew that you wanted to be a writer. And you were always a bookworm and a book lover. And you say that you read Gone with the Wind before you were 10, I think.
I think it was 12, but
12. And that, I read it too before I was 12. And, it's just funny. Like, that's all I used to just sit in the corner and read books all the time at family events, at restaurants, on family trips in the car. Like, people were always telling me to get my nose out of the book, and I'd much rather be with books than people, but that's another story. I would love at some point to talk, a lot, like in some ways, in addition to being a memoir, this is almost like a guidebook of the whole process of becoming a writer, finding your voice and getting published. And maybe we'll have time to get into some of that, but I want to go back to the beginning a little bit and just hear more about how did you know that you wanted to be a writer at such a young age? Did it come from the influence of books? You talk about having an interior monologue, which I always also had. And it wasn't until I was a full-grown adult that I realized not everyone has that. Not everyone has that sort of observational thing. So I guess I would love to hear more about that, but also, do you think that writers are born? Do you think that they're made? Or do you think it's sort of a nature-nurture combination of the two?
Ooh, good question. The first part was, when did I know I was a writer? From the first school assignments for creative writing, I just loved doing it. And I don't know what happened. I guess my mother must have shown my writing to my grandmother. Whatever happened, for my birthday, my grandfather, who owned a miniature printing press, made me 20 copies of this tiny little book, which is around here somewhere if I could find it. But anyway, and it had my 2 stories and my name was on the spine, and I got a dedication. I got about the author. I thought that was the most amazing thing ever. I was 10 years old and I was like, this is what I want to keep doing. I want my name on a big book's fine. Like this is it for me. And I also started keeping a diary right around the same time when I learned how to write at all, and have continued that for many, many, many years. So it just came very naturally to me. And I think I also have to give more credit to my mom. She would love this, because when I wrote an essay that I didn't know I was going to be published, it was just my way of coping. I wrote it, she found it, and of course read it, because that's my mom, and said, "This is great. You have to share this with other girls your age." It was about gaining weight and how I felt about my body, and I was 14 years old. And so we sent it in blind to 17 magazine, and they bought it. And I really, as I've talked so much about what formed me along the way, it was the fact that that magazine accepted my submission. Actually, I'm still friends with my editor of that article who picked it, Rory Evans. She's now like running Real Simple magazine. And the encouragement from my family and my parents, and the idea that I could do it and that I could be an author at age 10. So I think my own family's encouragement was hugely influential. Do I think writers are born nature nurture? I think, like you said, people who are born with that dialogue and the running commentary and the questioning and the what ifs and all of that are natural writers. Whether or not they choose to write or not is another thing. But they could all be writers. So that, I think, is something that you're born with in part. I think many, many people can learn how to write, but that's not coming from the same place.
Right. There's craft, and then there's that sort of that instinct. You know, I always said that when I was walking to school as a little girl, I always felt like there was a movie camera sort of observing everything that I was observing, and I was always creating these narratives in my head. And you know, then I started telling people that, and I learned I shouldn't tell people that. They thought I was a little nuts. But you know, I think some people, you're born with that kind of observational ability, or that inner narrative, and then learning the craft, learning how to write well, that's a completely different thing. But you want to be able to have something to say,
and not just observation, but also curiosity. I think you have to be really curious about other people.
Yes.
Because you can observe, but if you don't wonder, right, like, well, is that the babysitter or is that the sister? All of that, like, in any regular instance, I think that's part of that writerly instinct deep down.
Right. Yep. Memoir takes so much courage to write. You have to be vulnerable. You have to be honest. You're putting yourself out there. You're revealing things. You're probably getting members of your family and your friendship circles. They get mad at you. I've always felt like, I could never write a novel or a memoir until after my children are old enough, or my parents are too old to read anymore. Because it is, you have to be so vulnerable, and you're very vulnerable in this book. How did you get the courage to do this? Like, where did that come from? Even as a teenager, like, as much as I used to love to write when I was younger, to put yourself out there like that so that all of your peers could read it, so intimidating. It's terrifying. And I think it does require a certain amount of courage.
I have to say that, again, from a young age, whenever I tried it, it was met with so much positivity and gratitude that it kept propelling me to the next. I didn't wake up one day and decide to write a memoir. This has been something I've been sort of working on forever. I've been writing about my life forever, for a solid, I'm 46 now, for most of my life. And by the time I got to here, I've had so much practice writing about my life. Now, I will say all of this in aggregate, with so many people I don't know reading it, not just my business school class or people I kind of knew, but having it out in the world, I was pretty terrified at the last second. Like, right when it went up for sale, I was like, oh my gosh, I hope I didn't make a mistake. But again, I just haven't been listening to the negative people. In fact, at the end of the book, I'm like, if you have nothing nice to say, don't say anything at all. But if you liked or even loved the book, send me an email And those emails really are amazing and wonderful. So I try to protect myself from too much criticism. I've stopped reading any reviews. Although there are very many positive ones too, but you can't please everybody.
No.
But the courage was built up over time, is what I'm trying to say. And I've always been incredibly open in my writing. And I don't know how or why I'm able to do that and not be worried about it. I worry about so many other things. This I don't worry about. And I always have somebody who says that it helped them so much in their own life. And so I say to myself, every essay, everything I'm doing, like if this can help somebody and I can use my time and my fingertips to help somebody's life improve, then I have to do that.
Right. Well, that's a great attitude to have. And when you have that sort of higher purpose or mission in what you're doing, I'm sure that helps. And it's great that you also got all of this positive feedback. So much of what you write about in Bookends resonates. Reading about 9/11, you write about it. I lived downtown. I saw it on my way to work, on my walk to work. And, I have friends who've lost husbands, and you lost your best friend. And it was so painful to read that. Even so many years later, the trauma of that day is still there. And the way that you expressed it is a way I've never heard it really expressed. It was just so personal. It was so painful. And you said things that I haven't heard other people say, sort of talking about the things that are too hard for other people to say, that people don't want to talk about. And I don't want to dwell on that, but I just, there were so many, it was just so moving. And there's so many things in this book where I feel that women from a variety of experiences can relate to what the various experiences. You've had a lot more loss than I've had up until this point in my life. And I love that you say that you've turned to books again and again as ways to help you. I always have this idea that there's this kind of life library where any problem you have, and you're now they say there's an app for that. I always say there's a book for that, right? I mean, if you want to learn how to cook something, if you want to learn how to grieve, if you are going through a hard breakup, if you're a parent and you don't know what to do with your difficult child, there's always a book for that. And I love that each chapter in this book follows the books that you were reading during all of these different times in your life and how those books created solace for you. And it's so clever how each chapter title is a different book title. And I'm familiar with most of those books, and I'm sure that the people, here listening are also probably familiar with most of those books. Going back to how the whole writing process, originally this started as fiction, and it was called 40 Love.
This has gone through so much. It's the most windy journey. But originally, I first tried to write a memoir about 9/11 when I graduated from business school in 2003. And I decided to take a year off and write about it. And I didn't know how to write a memoir, but I felt like I had to get this story out. I had to explain it, because to me, I kept trying to write it and write it and write it, hoping I would somehow make sense of it and process the grief and the loss from a very sudden, unexplained death with no closure. So I wrote that whole memoir. And then I decided it was too personal and also probably not that good. And I decided to write it again as fiction that same year. And I got an agent, and it ultimately didn't sell, which was mortifying because I told everyone I went to business school that I was taking a year off to write a book. And now finally I have my 20th reunion coming up, and I can say I finally wrote a book. Now I've written a couple of books, but anyway. So that was the first iteration. Then I put that aside, got married, had kids, stayed home, worked from home, basically did not work for 11 years, aside from some freelance articles and all of that, and a couple startups and boards. And I don't know, I decided I wanted to stay home with all my kids, which I don't regret at all, but I wasn't doing a lot of writing. And then I ended up getting divorced, and all of a sudden I had every other weekend free. And that was also sort of a gut-wrenching, harrowing transition to all of a sudden not having the kids here and having the doors be open or closed at night was like this big debate for me with the empty rooms. And it still bothers me. And it's been, I don't know, 8 years or something. Anyway, no, it couldn't have been 8 years. But I had time. I started writing again. I started writing a lot of parenting essays about what it's like and all the demands of modern motherhood. And I wrote this viral article that went viral called A Mother's Right to Sanity. So what ended up happening is the man who now is my husband, Kyle, I had been telling him about the essays, and he said, you should take all those essays and make them into a book. And I said, oh, Mom doesn't have time to read books. But, and I had actually had a book come out. I ghost wrote a book, and they let me put my name on the cover, which was very sweet. So I did get that done in 2005, but that was like a fashion and fitness book. Anyway, long story short, I had time to write. I decided to write, and I'm good at writing book proposals. I've written so many book proposals. I should just be a book proposal for hire person, although they don't usually sell. So maybe actually don't hire me. But I wrote a book proposal for this book, Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. And I met with a few agents who said, well, nobody wants to read parenting essays from an unknown author. You know, you have no experience. And I'm like, well, you know, I've been writing for 30 years. It didn't matter. I wasn't on Facebook or Instagram. So I thought about writing. They said, do you have any other books in you aside from that one? And I said, well, what I really want to do, because at that point I had fallen in love with my current husband at age 40, something that was completely unexpected. I said, I want to write a book called 40 Love about falling in love again at 40. And of course my agent was like, ooh, tell me about that. You know, that sounds great. And I was like, well, I'll write it, but I don't think I can publish that. That's really personal. And I don't know that I'd want my kids to see that. She's like, well, you know what? Write it anyway. And let's see what happens. We can always take things out. So I started writing that book. And as I wrote 40 Love, I also started a podcast because I decided to use that title, Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books, as a podcast when a girlfriend who was an author suggested that I do that to build up this platform since I was clearly a nobody. And I thought I would do that on the side, which I did. And that ended up leading to all sorts of other things in my career and my life, and has changed everything about my life and has led to all these other things which were never in the plan and all keep going step by step. But meanwhile, 40 Love. So I wrote 40 Love as a memoir, and then I finished it. And then I was like, I cannot publish this. It's too personal, just like I thought. I'll write it again as a novel. So I wrote it again as a novel, and I sent that out. And meanwhile, I tried to sell a memoir or two similar to Bookends along the way. Like I tried once or twice in that same time period while I was writing 40 Love is fiction. I hope this isn't boring. And so I sent 40 Love out to a couple editors literally on like March 10th, 2020. And I had this really cute package. I bought these Z's, white ceramic Z's, and I filled them with mini tennis balls and wrapped it in cellophane and attached my manuscript. They sat on people's desks, sometimes for over a year, collecting dust. So I did end up emailing the manuscripts to those editors, and they all came back to me with totally opposing feedback on what I could do to improve it. And I was like, you know what? There's too much going on. I'm putting this aside. But I couldn't give up. Every time I tried to walk away from this project, I kept coming back to it. And I just was like, I cannot let this story go. I have to share the story. And then as other things happened through my life, I was like, I know I need to tell this story. So anyway, I finally decided to link in the books I was reading. I sold a proposal for this book. I used parts. I mean, it was my life, so I wasn't using actual parts, but scenes that I originally wrote about in Off Balance, the first book, also in 40 Love. I filled it in. I rewrote everything, and that's how it came to be. Long story. Sorry.
So it was 3 different versions of basically the same story with 3 different approaches, and then you had to rewrite the whole thing. So
pretty much. Yeah, but that part was fast. So that last draft didn't take me long at all.
In the book, you go to the new school, Susan Shapiro, the great writing teacher.
Yes.
Says to you, rejection isn't personal.
Mm-hmm.
And that sort of explain how did you interpret that when she said that to you? Because it's hard. I mean, if you're a writer, of course it's personal, especially if you're writing about your own life and your own experiences.
Yes. she helped me so much. I literally took a class called Writing for Newspapers and Magazines. And she said at the beginning of the class that whoever could sell a big article had to take her out to dinner or something like that, which I guess I didn't do, but I've now repaid her with podcast love and all of that. But it was great because I was emotional at every pitch that got rejected. And she said, no, you have it all in a document. As soon as the rejection comes in, you don't even think about it. Boom, send the next one off. You already have like a draft email essentially ready to go for the next one. And so it took all the pain out of that sting. Didn't even feel it. I was like, okay, I move on to this action. And I'm very like action oriented. So I like putting things into process and not having to think about it. Because once I get emotional, I cry for days. Like, I mean, all those rejections along the way that I just breezed over, I was like sobbing on the bathroom floor. So I learned that it's not always the right place. It has nothing to do with me. Editors are really busy. She was the first person who gave me a glimpse into what an editor's life was like and where they were when my little email came in the midst of 1,000 other things. And I tried to take that to heart with publishing, but of course that was particularly personal. But she's right. And now as a publisher, I see exactly what she means. We evaluate lots of great books that we pass on because they're not right for us. We're only doing 12 books a year. We have something similar. We're divided on if we like it or not. It's this, it's that. There's all these things. To have a book perfect at the right time for the right editor, the right publishing house is a very unlikely thing. So, but I try to really go deep into every submission, and because I know what it's like. So and I take that with me through everything that we do. I mean, I'm still going through that stuff. So
no, it's painful, but that's the thing. There's only like, I probably acquire 12 books a year, but I can't even tell you how many proposals I'm reading.
yeah.
And part of it's my personal taste, part of it's platform, part of it's what does my imprint, what are they looking for?
Yep.
Timing, too much competition. I mean, one of the things I liked is that Susan told you don't take it personally, but it also sounds like she taught you to go in and find the comps, to be very strategic.
Yes, that's true too.
About your approach and realize like this is a business. And in order to get people's attention, I need to do my research. I need to know who am I up against? How do I fit into this particular publisher's list, which I think is great advice for a lot of writers. Like, looking at this, reading this, I was like, wow, this is it's not a guidebook, it's a memoir, but I feel like any writer struggling with all of these things can find a lot of great advice in here about what it takes to get published, how difficult it is and why, and to not take it personally. And there's a whole section in here, and I underlined all of these sections I was going to read. And
Thank you for this careful read. That is so nice.
I'm not going to read them all because I'd rather just talk to you. But you're like, what about the words I wrote? What about the story? What about my writing? I put my heart and soul into this, and it was just like, nope, nope, nope. And that you have to kind of get over that. It's not necessarily about your writing. It's really about how your book fits into this bigger picture.
That's true.
To me, I think that's very comforting. I think that's comforting advice for any writer because it is so challenging.
And I think the more that you customize pitching for actually who you are pitching makes a huge difference. Because if you know you have something that's really right for a certain place, a certain podcast, a certain publishing house, a certain whatever, and you could maybe convince that person, right? Because maybe it is really right. Like maybe somebody's read your whole list and they know everything you've acquired, and they're like, these are the 4 books that you acquired. They're very similar. I don't know. It makes a huge difference versus pitches that go out to so many people and they don't think if it's going to fit.
Right.
It's the same, like I used to work in internet advertising and marketing and everything back in the day, and people would come in and just like pitch me their, Idea Lab should advertise in this magazine. And I'm like, do you even know what we do? Like, this is your presentation, but like, how is it going to help me if you want us to advertise? Like, it has to have relevance. So anyway.
Yep. I agree. And we could talk about that more, and maybe some of the questions can can get into that whole process. But one of the things I really wanted to talk to you about is motherhood and how challenging it is to be a mother and a writer at the same time. And when I know one of the things when I was writing Bookish Broads, I was in a certain place in my life where I was able to sit on the front porch and write for 10 hours a day. Now the kids were there, but they were old enough. I had my parents there to help me out, you know, to feed them or whatever. But in researching all of these women, female writers, the biggest obstacle really was education, lack of education, and motherhood. Because if you're pregnant and having kids back to back your whole life, and it's the Middle Ages, and you can't read, obviously you're not going to become a writer. But even today, right, reading all of that, reading the, you know, you talk about a mother's right to sanity. You know, they what Hamlet, April is the cruelest month. No, for mothers, September is the cruelest month. And we are in the thick of it right now. I still haven't signed all of the papers for my kids.
How old are your kids?
They are 14, they're 14 and 17. So they're in high school, and just waking up at 6 a.m. and getting them both out the door, and then this form and that form. Like, I think my son, like, it's been how many weeks of school now, and there's a textbook I still haven't figured out how to buy for him. And, you know, so you always feel like you're failing in so many ways as a mother, and all of the crazy demands on us. You talk about, well, my mother didn't do this, right? Our mothers were chain smoking, dropping us, like, go off to the park and play, see you later. And, you know, now we have to, it's like we have to micromanage every single move they make and the emails that we get. So I guess one of the questions I had for you, talk about, you know, moms don't have time to read. Well, moms definitely don't have time to write. And you know, obviously Virginia Woolf talked about a room of her own. So how did you find a room of your own? Because that's, I think, that's one of the biggest obstacles for us as women.
It's so true. When I am writing a personal essay or memoir or anything about myself, I don't need solitude, and I'm really quick. And I can do it. And I did a lot of it, you know, on the floor. The kids would be playing right there, and I would be sitting on the floor with my laptop. And I mean, I made sure they were okay, but you know, I was around. I'm nearby, and you know, it's not the benign neglect that my mother might prefer. You know, I was still hovering, but I at least had a laptop on my lap. So that type of writing I can do in front of other people, and really anywhere, coffee shops, whatever, it doesn't matter. But when I'm writing a novel, which I've tried to do many times, and I'm doing now, which actually sold, so that's like a blessing, but I have to finish writing it.
Awesome.
Thank you. That is really hard. Like, just so many variables have to line up, or else I just keep putting it off. And there's so many things I can procrastinate with. So I'm like, oh, okay, you know, let me work on this or that or the other thing. And I can't really do it when my kids are around. So I'm most successful when I leave and go somewhere. I actually, like, I have a friend who manages a hotel, and one time this summer, she snuck me in, and I worked in a room between 9 and 2 before the next person came. I got so much done. I think I wrote like 10,000 words. I was like, this is amazing. Wow. Yeah. I mean, not really 10,000, but a lot. And it was wonderful, but I don't know, but I don't get that particular thing. And I am divorced and remarried, so I still do have those weekends, but you know, there's so much. I run all these businesses on the weekend. I don't know. I'm having trouble, but kids make it harder for sure.
Yes. You know, J.K. Rowling, when she was under deadline and super late with her last Harry Potter book, and she checked herself into a hotel for a month and just banged it out. And Maya Angelou used to, she would rent a hotel room every day, and she would go in the morning and she would write all morning or like all day. She had a bottle of wine, her typewriter, her notebooks, and then she would go home for dinner time, be with her family, do all of that family stuff, and then she would go back for a few hours in the evening, at which point she would read whatever she had written that morning and edit it. And I'm like, well, that's pretty ideal, but we all can't get away with that. Which reminds me, like one of the favorite lines in the book, you were at Harvard Business School and you said one of the most important lessons that you learned there was good enough would have to do, not everything could be perfect. And I think as women, as mothers, as workers, as friends, as wives, I mean, it's like we have to let go of that. And I think it takes you to get a certain age, perhaps, when you finally realize I have one life and I can't be perfect all the time. And some things are going to slip through the cracks, like my son's textbook. But, like there are certain things that are just going to take longer than they used to, and people are just going to have to deal with it. And I didn't have to go to Harvard Business School to learn that. I read your book and I was like, yep, that's correct. That is right.
I picked up a few other things.
Yeah, I'm sure you did. You're running businesses. I know one more thing, and I had this question, and after talking to you, I feel like maybe it's not a great question. It might be sort of a dumb question. But I know that, like, as an editor, I feel very confident. I really know what I'm doing. I know how to make people's manuscripts better, and I know how to pull it out of them. And I love the writing process, but I'm deeply insecure about it. And I feel like it's never good enough. And when my proposal was going out on submission, I was terrified. I was like, everyone I know is going to know that I'm a terrible writer and my whole reputation will be ruined. And you said something about you had it was like a homework club or like some group of people that you studied with, and you said, like, how long is it going to take for them to figure out that I'm not as smart as they are? Mm-hmm. Do you ever feel as a writer? I mean, I don't think you do, but I wonder if other writers who are listening have this imposter syndrome. Like, who am I to tell other people, to advise them, or to tell them about my experiences, or my writing is never going to be good enough. Why is anyone going to read what I have to say? Did those kinds of thoughts ever cross your mind?
I am never going to be a super duper literary writer. I am not going to win the National Book Award. Do you know, like, that is not the way I write. And a lot of people really value that. I really value that when I read, but I read very widely. So I don't only read that type, but I feel insecure among the subset of people who only read literary fiction and the New Yorker, and I'm not going to please them. So I'm not to say there's a lot of gradations after that, but yes, when I am not going to write that kind of book. I can kind of pull off a sentence or two. I can try it, but it's so not authentic to me that it doesn't come off very well at all. So yes, I am like, oh gosh, all those people are going to hate it. Like, how can I call myself a writer? All I do is I take my thoughts and I put them on the page. Like I write in a very conversational type of way, where so many people are like, I feel like I just had coffee with a friend for a couple hours when I read your book. I am happy about that. That is my skills. That is my skill. I don't have the same skills as everybody else. I can't craft the perfect sentence necessarily, or be lyrical, or necessarily, like, I have some nice sentences, but it's more that it's a different type of writing. So yes.
It's hard. And I sometimes feel like if I've read a really, really good book, I mean, recently I read Lessons in Chemistry. Just loved.
Yeah.
Just loved it. But at the end, I was so sad because I just thought, I can never write like that.
Well, yes. Yeah.
The dry wit, the humor, the level of intelligence. I was just like, I know what I'm capable of and what I can do. And it's hard work. And it's not, I write nonfiction, not fiction, because I always feel like I'm not good enough for fiction. And, it's a different, your world's building, and you're doing very different things. So it's great to hear that you have that you're evolving and doing the fiction writing.
I like a challenge. I
Yeah.
want to try everything. I want to write a YA book and a middle grade book and a screenplay eventually. Like I get excited being challenged in those ways. It doesn't make them good, but I like to learn like what makes it good. Can I do it? What does it take to do it well? So I think my baseline is always personal essay, memoir, whatever, that comes so easily to me. But sometimes it's fun to do things that don't come as easily.
Yeah. No, and that's, I mean, I've written several novels and they're horrible and I would never show any of I always like burn them before anything happens to me so no one ever reads them. But although I have read,
I bet you're really good and you have an amazing novel and you should just get it out of the box and because all you need is an editor like you and that book will be whipped into shape.
Well, let's hope so. You'd hope so, because as I've learned, even an editor needs an editor, right? Everybody needs an editor, and anyone who thinks that they don't is not going to have a great book.
Yeah.
And different people's writing processes are different. Obviously, the more you read, the better a writer you become. I've always just sort of I dump it all. I like to outline and then I just dump it all there. And I have these middle of the night scribbles. I always just put it all out there. Then I go back, I revise, and I edit it over and over again. And then someone else needs to edit it several times too. It always sort of made me mad that Ernest Hemingway was like, I need to write 5 perfect pages a day. I'm like, nobody writes 5 perfect pages a day, but I guess different people, they have different processes. And one of the things, when I was writing about Joan Didion, when she was younger, her mother gave her a notebook and said, here, write, just start writing, like do something with your time. And she would copy Ernest Hemingway's sentences. And that's how she taught herself to write, just by getting into the rhythm. And, it is, as you've shown, it's a lot like being a successful writer. It's a struggle, it's a journey, it's a creative journey, it's a time and resources journey. And then it's also the getting published and wanting to get your word out there kind of journey, like they're going out and promoting the book as you've been doing. There's so many different pieces of it. So you really need to love what you're doing and feel how, it's like you have to be compelled.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be compelled to write. You can't do it just because you think it's something fun to do, because it's really not that much fun to do. I mean, it is while you're doing it, or certain parts of it are fun, but there's so many challenges along the way. So it's great to see that you have done that you're not afraid, you're fulfilling your dream. And I love also that you are out there being an advocate and supporter of other writers, helping promote them, helping publish them with the magazine, with literacy partners. I've said at this point in my career, I've been doing this for a long time, but that's my end game. My end game is to really become a literacy advocate and to, I encourage writers as part of my job, and I love to write, but really I just allowing other people to get their voices out there, because it is so hard. And, writers can be very competitive with one another. They can be snarky. And I think, what's so wonderful about this community, that I've gotten to know a little bit, and the Pulpwood Queens, and, they're all very supportive of one another. So it's nice to see you doing that. I feel like when you become successful, sort of pursued your dream and accomplished it, that it is your responsibility in a way to go help other people do that. And that's what you're doing. So,
well,
wonderful.
That's what I started to, that's what I love to do. Like that was what I was doing way before these got sold.
Yeah.
The podcast it's amazing. It's such a joy for me. So I'm helping them, but I have to say it's really helping me. It's making me learn and meet such interesting dynamic people. Like I thought my friend circle was set, that these are the people I hang out with, and nothing against my friends and my old friends I love and adore like nothing else. But I'm just going to be friends with the people in my circles here or in my schools or because of my kids or because of whatever. And I had no idea. I'm not the type of person who's going to go to like a networking coffee, like cocktail party and actually meet anybody. That doesn't work for me. So I was like, this is it. And it turns out it wasn't even a smidge of it. So helping other people, also surrounding myself, the authors you're saying are snarky. Yeah, there are. And for whatever reason, like I'm only keeping nice people around me. I've structured my company to make sure if you are not a collaborative, warm person, you are not going to be publishing a book with us. Like, I'm sorry. I want to work with nice people. I want my employees to be nice, not even team members. So life is short. And so I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I hear you. So I wonder, I know we probably have about 10 minutes or so, and I know that people are going to want to ask you questions. So Jonathan.
Doesn't look like there are any questions. Does anybody want to ask a question? Is anyone there?
Questions? All right, well then.
I have a ton of questions.
Oh, okay.
So let me interject here and build off something that you were both just talking about, the idea of being parts of collaborative communities, of actively seeking that out. That's certainly what I hope, and in my experiences, book clubs are as well. Not a collaboration among writers, but a collaboration among readers, people wanting to share ideas and their intellectual and emotional responses to what they're reading as a group. Reading can so often be something that we carry out in isolation and don't have an opportunity to turn into a discussion, to turn into a dialogue. So given that we're here tonight in support of our Lowcountry Book Club Convention, I'm wondering if both of you would be willing to talk a little bit about what you see as the value of book clubs and perhaps some experiences you've had either as members of book clubs or as authors you've gotten to present or advocate with book clubs. What do they mean to you? What value do they have in your lives?
You want to go?
If someone asked me to join a book club, I have a heart attack because I have no time to read anything other than all of my work. But I've spoken at a lot of book clubs, and it is such a joy because people, they're just people asking you questions and interested in your work and your writing process. It's just being interested in the subject matter. It's just so validating. It's so much fun for me. And, because you are in isolation when you're doing the actual writing, and then you have to sort of turn on your extrovert hat and go out there and talk. It really feels so good to take all of that work you've done and share it with people who care about it. So I know, Zibby, you've been talking to a lot of people lately, and I'm sure.
I come at this more as the value of being in a book club angle. And I wrote about book clubs that I've been in my book. I haven't always found the right exact book club, but I've been in many, probably 5 or 6 book clubs or something over the many, many years, sometimes 2 at once. And I love it because books are all about connection. They're about connecting the author to the reader. They're about connecting readers to each other and having that shared experience. It's like we've all lived through whatever's in the book. And all we want to do a lot of the time is talk about what we've just all been through together. And book clubs are great because they force you to read and have it. If you're sort of a Gretchen Rubin obliger like I am, I need deadlines and to get things done. And so you have a deadline and people are there waiting for you and you read, or you get together with friends and you're all inspired by the book and you get to talk about which book should we choose. And then you're all talking about different books and everybody's getting exposed to different books. And it's wonderful. It's a deeper connection than anything else you can have, is living through this narrative in your head with someone else, even if they're far away. You could point to a book with someone who like barely speaks your same language and nod your head like, oh, it's amazing.
Yeah, it's, I was just on vacation the last 2 weeks of August down in Hilton Head, and when I go on vacation, I read a book a day, and it's like I have to cram in all of my pleasure reading in in 1 or 2 weeks, and I'm never happier. And then I share it on Instagram. I share the books that I've read, but it's not a conversation when it's on Instagram necessarily. You're just sort of putting it out there. I think, let's see, the kids will be in college in 3 years, then I can join a book club. So
Yeah, I have a virtual book club that I lead. So I pick the books for that. So it's kind of cheating, but I do get to talk to them all. And we actually have like thousands of members, but only about 40 are my regulars who come all the time. But I'm always so interested in people's perspectives on the same stuff. But I don't go out to now a book club like I used to and have wine at 7 o'clock on a Tuesday or something. But I do miss that.
You have a question in the chat from writer Iris Jackson, and she's asking about any advice you can give, probably you, Zibby, about how a writer with a book can pitch that book to book clubs to be considered. Is that
How do you write your
different?
pitch to speak at book clubs?
Oh, you can see it.
You mean from the writer perspective?
Yes. Mhm.
Oh, I've never done that actually. I've never written a pitch to speak at a book club. Maybe I should. I don't know. I don't know. I haven't tried it.
I've done it, and I can tell you, just what I did for my book was, because my book is sort of educational, it's history, it's women's history. So I did a book club, like a guide. I don't know if I ever sent that to you, Jonathan, but I made it myself. I came up with the questions. I came up with like the summaries. I came up with, things to ponder and just have discussions about. And then I taught myself how to use Canva.
I love Canva. Obsessed. Obsessed.
It's like I learned, when you're a writer, you learn all sorts of new skills that they don't teach you in the corporate world. So I learned how to use Canva, and I tried to design it in a pretty way. And I would find these book clubs, a lot of them on Instagram or online, and I would just email. I would find the person running it, and I would just email the book club guide to them and say, if you're interested in having me come speak, I'm happy to do that. Now it's hard to do that because you're not really making money doing that. It's a lot of time. So it depends on what your priorities are, the timing, where you are in your life, where you are in your publishing process. I had my aunt bring me to her book club, and that was super fun. That was for the Dolly Parton book, and everyone dressed up like Dolly Parton, which I was not expecting. So that was a hoot. So it's, you have to make it fun for people, and I think give them some. The guide really helped people say, oh, this is what this book is about. They didn't make it easy for them, so they don't have to do the work. Say, here, look, I'm already providing you with the questions, the summary, and things to talk about.
Yeah, Lauren, your book club guide is extraordinary. You did send that to me, and I think it's on your website as well as a PDF. It was above and beyond sort of the reader's guide that we see in the back of so many books, where they're very often the scripted, obvious 12 questions that anybody would come up with on their own. It was very thorough. And if I remember correctly, Lauren, it included the interview that Holland did with you for Southern Review of Books as well.
Right, you helped me with that. That's why it was so thorough, because I just lifted and plopped it into my. But it was very helpful because she asked such incredible questions. They were so thoughtful, and I spent a lot of time thinking about the answers. So putting that in there, it made sense because I felt like it was answering the questions that people would already have.
I think it's, we're kind of talking around it, but I think it's actually very similar, to get back to Iris's question, to how a writer with a manuscript would pitch you, Zibby. It's pointless to do it if they've not actually done the research to understand what you're about, which you mentioned earlier. So to just be contacting random book clubs who, maybe only read nonfiction, or maybe only read this, or make their decisions in a way that would never be inclusive of outside recommendations or author-generated requests. It's a show of respect that you've actually put some time in to do that. but there's no equivalent for book clubs that there are for finding publishers or agents. There's no guidebooks like that, right? There's no poets and writers directory that's searchable. And that's a question I get from writers all the time about even trying to find book clubs to try and engage with their works. And here that was part of the inspiration for creating the Lowcountry Book Club Convention as well, to gather them all together and effectively create a directory to get to know them, to get to know what would be interesting to them, which is why so many writers attend the Lowcountry Book Club Convention, because you can meet them in person, exactly as writers do at writer conferences, right? So it's a very similar model to that. Let's take a different approach to the same kind of question. Zibby, how do you actually decide what the books are for your virtual book club? What's your thought process for making those selections?
As process oriented as you might think, it's like a little ad hoc. I was literally doing my book club, and I always have like my inbox or up here for emergencies with my kids or whatever. And I was doing the book club, and I was like, okay, we do memoir and fiction. And I said, okay, I promise I'll pick another novel soon. I promise the next one will be fiction. I just like haven't had time to think about the next one. And literally, as we're doing that, I get pitched this book by somebody I adore, and a book I really wanted to read, which is more like a thriller by this woman, Katie Seiss. And I was like, oh, that's perfect. I was like, would she like to? They actually pitched me, could she do a virtual book club? And I was like, yes, could she go next month? So sometimes it just happens like that. I don't know. I used to do it every week, but I try to balance lots of different voices and make sure I'm including lots of different perspectives and taking people different places, right? Where they're going in the narrative and what they bring that's interesting. And I love it because every single time people tell me, I wouldn't have read that if you hadn't recommended it, and I loved it. And I feel so good about that. I feel so good. It's amazing.
It's great when you can get people across the new threshold, when they value and trust your recommendations and the process and the experience of the book club, and they'll read something that they never would have read otherwise. That's wonderful when that happens.
And even reading in general, I ran into somebody this summer who raced over to me at this random kids party or whatever, and she's like, after I listened to your event with blah 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 or whatever we had done together, I can't remember, and she's like, I started reading again. She's like, I've read 4 books since I last saw you, and I haven't read a book in like 15 years. She's like, they're so good. And I was like, great. Yeah, reading is amazing.
We have one more question in the chat, and this may be our last question for the evening, given the time now. It's for both of you. What's your favorite part of doing book signings at bookstores? And I guess maybe the overarching question really is, what's your favorite part about getting to engage with your readers one-on-one?
Lauren?
Well, I think, to me, it's you're coming out of isolation and you're finding people who appreciate the work that you've done, and whatever you've done, it resonates with them. It's validating. But like we're talking about book clubs, it's a sense of community.
Mm-hmm.
It's how you find your people, the people who show up to book signings are people who care about books and who are expressing some interest in what it is that you've written about. So it's like, this is my community now. These are my people.
To be honest, my favorite parts have been the authors I know who come. It's so nice. I mean, I love meeting the new people, but I don't get a chance to really get to know people. And I don't know, I never know what to say. I feel like I'm not that good at book signings yet. And luckily not that many people want my book signed, so it's fine. But it really touches me when authors that I've only known on Instagram, or I had them on the podcast, but I haven't seen them in a while, show up in person at an event. And I'm like, that's amazing. And every event I do, even the one event I did where only 2 people showed up, one of those people was on my podcast, and then she brought her husband. So that is the best thing for me.
Pat Conroy's signing lines used to go on I sat with him for 5 hours one night, and he never broke the line. He never got up and had any kind of break. And the reason they were so long was not just the number of people that were there, but it was because he wanted to have a genuine one-on-one, authentic 5-minute conversation with every single person in that line, to thank them for being his reader and to get to know them. He thought he put everything about himself on the page, so they already knew him, and he wanted the reverse to be authentically true. He wanted to have that kind of dynamic. And there would be people who would come to a signing, 9 years later and say, Mr. Conroy, I'm sure you don't remember me. And he would actually remember something from that conversation all those years ago. It was remarkable. It was always just a masterclass in reader appreciation to sit with Pat and see him do that. But he would also do the thing that you're describing, Zibby. When he went to the Pulpwood Queens Convention in Jefferson, Texas, he was in the signing line for every single author. Accomplished, first-timer, self-published, traditionally published, did not matter. He bought every single book. He had every single one signed because he wanted those writers, regardless of where they were in their career, to know how much he appreciated and supported what they were doing too. It was just incredible to see.
Really
Yes.
amazing.
Well,
maybe I'm doing it all wrong. Maybe I should be holding up my line with deep conversations about all the stuff. All right. Well, I'll blame you when people complain. The 3 people.
Okay.
The next
I will take that blame. Yes.
Yeah.
Wiley Cash, a best-selling New York Times author from North Carolina, tells a story about what you described, having a book signing and having 2 people show up. So he took them to dinner, and they've become great friends. That was Wiley's solution. I'm just going to get to really know these 2 people and make the most about it. And, he made fans for life out of those 2.
The funny part about that event is on the panel was the bookstore had organized. It was me and 2 other women. I ended up getting pitched a book by one of the other women. It was amazing, and we bought it. And I love it. And I've gotten to know her really well. So you know what? You never know what's going to come out of anything.
Serendipity.
Just say yes.
Yes, agreed.
So, okay.
I appreciate you both saying yes to this time tonight. And we are unfortunately at the end of it. So I just want to say in closing here, one final thank you to you, Zibby, and to you, Lauren, for being such an amazing part to this kickoff event for our 6th annual Lowcountry Book Club Convention here from the Conroy Center in Beaufort. Thank you so much for this time, and thank you for all that you do in support of writers and readers as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. It was so nice. Lauren, that was amazing. You're a great interviewer. Time for a podcast.
It's great I wish I was down there in person, Jonathan. It would be great to come back sometime. I always love talking to your group. So
please do come back. We'd love that.
all right.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Zibby.
Thank you, Lauren. Bye-bye.
Good night, everybody.